They were Johannesburg's original cash-in-transit heist specialists. Welcome to Just Off the Highway. I'm Prodgers, and this is part 2 of some stories with an Irish flavour that resonate with the history of South Africa. Now, as I said in part 1, this isn't a comprehensive picture. I have cherry-picked some fascinating events in various periods, and this episode is jam-packed with some serious skullduggery and adventures outside the law. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm trying to create a negative impression of Irish people. I am not. There are important historical figures that gave Irish names to places in South Africa like Athlone, Belfast, Caledon, Craddock, Uppington, even Sir Lowry's Pass. And considering that the Irish never settled here in massive numbers, that contribution has been huge. But there's also excitement in good stories about bad guys. And sometimes that aura, that hint of the mysterious around them, can bump up against history and change its course. Let's start by going back over 170 years to Cape Town. In 1849, a ship called the Neptune tried to land at the Cape. It was carrying convicts, most of whom were Irish. And the townspeople refused to let a single person set foot ashore. Firstly because they were convicts, but also because they were Irish. That's all it took to create hysteria in the Cape. Here was a cause that united English and Dutch-speaking colonists at last. The ship was forced to float just offshore in Simonstown Harbour for 5 whole months, while the Cape colonists boycotted any dealings with it. Those on board suffered food shortages and illness until eventually the ship had to sail on to Tasmania. And the British abandoned their idea of settling convicts at the Cape, a decision that changed the future of this country completely. So, now I want to skip forward about 40 years and 1,000 kilometers to look closer to the Highveld. Let's pick up the thread after gold has been discovered on the Witwatersrand. And by the way, I'm standing in an area known as the Mining District, in the Marshalltown area of central Joburg, where there are some really evocative, real relics from the early digging days that you can see and even touch. So if you want to get a really good feel of those early gold rush days, this place is worth a visit. Irish people were part of the crowds that arrived to work on the mines. Many were engineers who had special skills operating and maintaining mining machinery. But there were others whose main talents were knowing how to handle firearms and being willing to use them. You see, some were Irish troops who had deserted from the British Army when they were stationed in other parts of South Africa, and they made their way up to the reef. They weren't engineers, but they understood that a gun is an effective spanner for loosening a victim's grip on his money. They were daring men with military discipline and tactics, and they formed gangs of highwaymen who robbed anyone unlucky enough to be traveling on a lonely road. Perhaps because of their ex-military connections, they became known as the Irish Brigade. And the Irish Brigade ambushed stagecoaches and wagons. They were Johannesburg's original cash-in-transit heist specialists. Notorious outlaws with names like McEwen and McLaughlin roamed the goldfields. But maybe because they concentrated their crimes on isolated government and mining company property, for a time they were actually quite popular, dashing, charismatic figures who did what many poor people wished secretly that they could do. And the Irish Brigade only faded when the railways were built and there was safer transport for people and for goods. Now, years later, there were rumors, legends that some of the gold had disappeared from the Witwatersrand, that it was not just for personal greed, but that it was destined for Ireland to finance the struggle of the Irish people against the British. So I guess the effects worked both ways. And there are tales of a sunken ship and secret agents, and they all end in mystery and just tantalizing echoes. Of course, the catastrophe of the Second Anglo-Boer War was just around the corner, and a completely different Irish Brigade was about to play its part in our history, fighting on both the Boer side, sometimes against Irish regiments serving on the British side, like at the Battle of Talana Hill. But I'm going to skip over that chapter now because there's simply too much history to cram into this episode. I'm going to keep it criminal. I want to jump ahead again, this time to 1914. At exactly that time, by a strange twist of fate, there was another gang of Irish criminals terrorizing the Witwatersrand. They were called the Foster Gang. Now, they were wanted for a robbery and murder spree that lasted 3 months and had police on high alert. A huge manhunt of multiple roadblocks was set up to get them. Now, one of them was here at this spot, at the intersection of Deville Road, now called Albertina Sisulu, and De Toy Street. And it's only a few minutes away from the center of Johannesburg, at a place called Langlaagte. The First World War had just broken out. The newly formed Union of South Africa was bitterly divided over whether our forces should attack German Southwest Africa, now called Namibia. And tensions were rising. And one man with the gravitas to calm the situation was famous Anglo-Boer War General de la Rey. Now there was confusion though as to which side he would actually support. In all this hysteria, on the night of the 15th of September 1914, a car came speeding down the street to this intersection in the dark night. It refuses to stop or even slow down at a roadblock, and a policeman under enormous stress thought that this must be the dangerous Foster Gang. He fired one shot at the rear tire, but the car was carrying General de la Rey, who was rushing to Potchefstroom. The bullet ricocheted and hit de la Rey in the back, killing him. A short while later, the Foster Gang were trapped and came to their own sticky end, but they had a lasting effect on South Africa that was much more than they deserved. That anger and bitterness and suspicion and strife from de la Rey's killing influenced South Africa's politics for decades. I think we still feel the effects today. I wonder how many thousands of South Africans cross this intersection every day without even realizing how the events at this spot changed South Africa. And again, I just marvel at the fact that how often Irish people, whether by coincidence or destiny, were present at these hinge points in our history. That's all from this underworld edition of Just Off the Highway. A big thank you to Sean Culhane for his knowledge and conversation. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support me on this endlessly surprising journey, leave me a cup of coffee on buymeacoffee.com/Prodgers. So see you soon, just off the highway. Cheers.